Indeed. Let's go to Downing Street. The Prime Minister is speaking and he has the Chancellor with him too.
Plan for beating this new coronavirus. First, we must stop the disease spreading to a point where it overwhelms our NHS. And every country in the world has the same problem. This is a disease that is so dangerous and so infectious that without drastic measures to check its progress, it would overwhelm any health system in the world. And I've used the Italian health system. It is excellent. And the problem is not with the health systems, it's the numbers of sufferers. That's why we announced the steps yesterday that we did, advising against all unnecessary contact, steps that are unprecedented since World War II. They will have an effect on the spread of the disease. The shielding of vulnerable groups will also reduce suffering. And I want to thank everybody at this stage for what we're all doing to follow this advice. I stress that although the measures announced are already extreme, we may well have to go further and faster in the coming days to protect lives and the NHS. Secondly, we're doing all we can and as quickly as we can to increase the capacity of the NHS. That means more testing, more beds, more ventilators and more trained staff. It means greater support for NHS and other staff. And it means much better data and much better technology. Third, we must do all we can to boost science and research. We must study this disease, test drugs that already exist and have been through medical trials to see what helps treat severe cases and search for a vaccine. Fourth, we must act like any wartime government and do whatever it takes to support our economy. And that's the main purpose of this press conference this afternoon. We must support millions of businesses and tens of millions of families and individuals through the coming months. And to do that, the government machine must and will respond with a profound sense of urgency. Thousands of brilliant officials are already working round the clock, but we must do more and faster. The Chancellor will be saying much more about this in a moment, with further announcements in the coming days. Fifth, we will need to strengthen other public services that will be under great pressure from the direct and indirect effects of the disease, such as the effects of staff shortages and from the economic pressures. All institutions will be under great pressure, and we will therefore invest hugely in the people that we all rely on. And again, I want to thank all our public servants for what they are already doing. Ultimately, to beat this crisis, we will need a combination of better science, technology, medicine, data, government, operations, economic support, learning from other countries, and social support. As time goes on, we will learn more and more about the disease and the effects of our actions. And while we need national unity, we also need international cooperation. And although we now need to impose physical distance between ourselves, we must at the same time have closer social support for each other. Yes, this enemy can be deadly, but it is also beatable. And we know how to beat it, and we know that if, as a country, we follow the scientific advice that is now being given, we know that we will beat it. And however tough the months ahead, we have the resolve and the resources to win the fight. And to repeat, this government will do whatever it takes. I'll now hand over for more on that to Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Good afternoon, everybody. The coronavirus pandemic is a public health emergency, but it is also an economic emergency. We have never in peacetime faced an economic fight like this one. I know that people are deeply worried. I know that people's anxiety about the disease itself is matched only by their anxiety about their livelihoods. Last week, I set out an initial economic response in the budget. I promise to do whatever it takes to support our economy through this crisis. and that if the situation changed, I would not hesitate to take further action. And that is what I want to begin doing today. This struggle will not be overcome by a single package of measures or isolated interventions. It will be won through a collective national effort. Every one of us doing all we can to protect family, neighbours, friends, jobs. This national effort will be underpinned by government interventions in the economy on a scale unimaginable only a few weeks ago. This is not a time for ideology and orthodoxy. This is a time to be bold, a time for courage. I want to reassure every British citizen, this government will give you all the tools you need to get through this. We will support jobs, we will support incomes, we will support businesses, and we will help you protect your loved ones. We will do whatever it takes. In the budget last week, I set out the first stage of our economic response with a £30 billion package of support for people and businesses. But I also said in the budget that as the situation evolves, we would take further action. And as the Prime Minister set out yesterday, we're now approaching the fast growth part of the upwards curve. He has set out the next stage of our public health response, and so I now wanted to update everyone on the next stage of our economic response. First, the government will stand behind businesses, small and large. I can announce today an unprecedented package of government-backed and guaranteed loans to support business to get through this. Today, I am making available an initial £330 billion of guarantees, equivalent to 15% of our GDP. That means any business who needs access to cash to pay their rent, their salaries, suppliers, or purchase stock will be able to access a government-backed loan or credit on attractive terms. And if demand is greater than the initial £330 billion I'm making available today, I will go further and provide as much capacity as required. I said whatever it takes, and I meant it. That support will be delivered through two main schemes. To support liquidity amongst larger firms, I have today agreed a new lending facility with the Governor of the Bank of England to provide low-cost, easily accessible commercial paper. To support lending to small and medium-sized businesses, I'm extending the new business interruption loan scheme I announced at budget last week so that rather than loans of £1.2 million, it will now provide loans of up to £5 million with no interest due for the first 6 months. Both of these schemes will be up and running by the start of next week. And I am also taking a new legal power in the COVID bill to offer whatever further financial support I decide is necessary. Some sectors are facing particularly acute challenges. In the coming days, my colleague, the Secretary of State for Transport, and I will discuss a potential support package specifically for airlines and airports. And yesterday, I asked my Cabinet colleagues to urgently convene meetings over the coming days with business leaders and representatives in the most affected sectors to identify other specific opportunities to support them and their industries, including possible regulatory forbearance. I repeat, we will do whatever it takes. Second, as well as access to finance, businesses need support with their cash flow and fixed costs. Following the changed medical advice yesterday, there are concerns about the impact on pubs, clubs, theatres, and other hospitality, leisure, and retail venues. Let me confirm that for those businesses which do have a policy for insurance that covers pandemics, that the government's action is sufficient and will allow businesses to make an insurance claim against their policy. But many of those businesses don't have insurance, so we will need to do more. I announced last week that for businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors with a rateable value of less than £51,000, they will pay no business rates this year. Today, I can go further and provide those businesses in those sectors with an additional cash grant of up to £25,000 per business to help bridge through this period. Additionally, I am also extending today the business rates holiday to all businesses in those sectors, irrespective of their rateable value. That means every single shop, pub, theatre, music venue, restaurant, and any other business in the retail, hospitality or leisure sector will pay no business rates whatsoever for 12 months. And if they have a rateable value of less than £51,000, they can also now get a cash grant as well. I also announced last week that we would be providing £3,000 cash grants to the 700,000 of our smallest businesses. In light of the new circumstances and to support their cash flow, today I can increase those cash grants to £10,000. Taken together, on top of the unlimited lending capacity I've already announced, this is a package of direct support to businesses through tax cuts and grants in this financial year worth more than £20 billion. And that comes on top of the existing multi-billion-pound package I set out at budget, which included reimbursing small and medium-sized companies for the cost of statutory sick pay. Local authorities will be fully compensated for the cost of these measures, and the devolved administrations will receive at least £3.5 billion in additional funding as a result of these measures to provide support to businesses in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. I repeat again, we will do whatever it takes. Third, I will strengthen our support for peoples and individuals. At budget last week, I committed £1 billion to support the financial security of vulnerable people through a £500 million boost to the welfare system and a £500 million hardship fund for local authorities. Following discussions with the industry today, I can announce that for those in difficulty due to coronavirus, mortgage lenders will now offer a 3-month mortgage holiday so that people will not have to pay a penny towards their mortgage costs while they get back on their feet. And in the coming days, I will go much further to support people's financial security. In particular, I will work with trade unions and business groups to urgently develop new forms of employment support to help protect people's jobs and their incomes through this period. As I said last week, this is first and foremost a public health emergency, and I reiterate today our commitment that whatever resources the NHS needs, it will get. Let no one doubt our resolve. When I said in the budget that we will do everything we can to keep this country and our people healthy and financially secure, I meant it. The measures I've announced today are part of a comprehensive, coordinated and coherent response to what is a serious and evolving economic situation. These are only the first steps. I will set out the next stage of our response in the coming days. We have never faced an economic fight like this one, but we are well prepared. We will get through this, and we will do whatever it takes. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rishi. Patrick, is there anything you want to add at this stage? Or we'll thank you very much. We'll just go straight to questions then. Is Laura Koonsberg? Yes, please, Laura Koonsberg from the BBC.
Thank you very much. Chancellor and Prime Minister, you've just announced a vast package of support. But I know that you said the loan scheme should be up and running next week. You said you'll have more measures to come up in the coming days. But can you guarantee to firms who need to pay wages now and families who worry about paying the rent now that they will not lose out while you work through the details of what comes next? And a question, if I may, to Sir Patrick. Obviously, the scientific advice changed dramatically in the last couple of days. But do you have any regrets about not taking more draconian measures sooner?
Well, just on the first point, Laura, which was to me and to Rishi, be in no doubt, the state is asking people to do something to make very considerable changes to their lives, and it is only right therefore, that the state should stand behind people as they make those changes. And that's what a government, that's what a society is there to do. It's there to look after people through thick and thin and to make sure that we get through this together. And that's what we're going to do.
If I should just add, Laura, you're absolutely right that people should have access to the support they need as quickly as possible. That's why when all the interventions that we designed at budget and today, we've had in our mind the ability to execute and operationalise them as soon as possible. There's no good having measures which sound brilliant but ultimately can't be delivered in time given the pace of what we're dealing with. What I would say for people who urgently need help is to do two things. One is to talk to their local authorities if they're in a particularly vulnerable position. Local authorities are well placed to provide direct support through their assistance schemes, and as we announced at budget last week, an extra £500 million is going to local authorities to supplement the support that they already give. And with regards to their creditors and banks, we have had extensive discussions with the banks who understand the situation that people are in and will, they have assured me, provide flexibility to those people in those circumstances and understanding.
And in answer to the second question, we laid out at the beginning the package of measures that would need to be looked at, and we said they need to come in at the right time and they need to come in the right combination. And what we've said is that the stage of the epidemic is now onto the fast upstroke. We are at the stage where these need to come in. They need to come in forcibly as they have done, and that's the right action to take at the right time. And the other packages that we've talked about, the other things that may be also necessary, may also need to come in, so that this is a fast-moving situation in which we need to take the right decisions at the right time of this epidemic, and it's clearly one that's a very serious situation.
Thanks. Sam Coates, Sky News.
Sam Coates, Sky News. Question for each of you. Sir Patrick, the jaw-dropping piece of research from Imperial College yesterday suggested that we would go to that the only option was to go for a suppression strategy, which could take up to 18 months, and was there for that long because we were looking for a vaccine. Is that how you see it? Is a vaccine the goal as you understand it? Mr. Sunak, you've suggested a package that in part will be valid for 3 months. Is that how long you see this crisis lasting? And you're offering predominantly loans. How are businesses ever going to pay stuff back given the nature of this crisis? And Prime Minister, some people came away from yesterday's briefing somewhat confused about guidance, for instance, for the elderly.
Right.
Do you accept that the buck stops absolutely with you in this crisis? And do you take responsibility for the actions of your father?
Right. I think I've got a bit of... Patrick, why don't you go first?
Yes, so the work from Imperial, clearly that work's been feeding into SAGE since the very beginning of the process. Neil Ferguson's been on the SAGE committee, and so it was something that we looked at, we asked for that piece of work to come through that particular piece. And just to be clear, what suppression in that paper refers to is exactly what we've been talking about, which is squashing this right down and making sure that we give room for the NHS to cope. And that's what the message is. In terms of the time frame, this needs to be done in a way that we can look at releasing it at some point and seeing what the effect is. And none of us anywhere in the world know how to do that yet in terms of whether it bounces back or not at that point. So that's what's going to have to happen after we've got this under control, is to look at how you then release these measures at the right time to monitor the effects. In terms of vaccines, and vaccines are the answer to this, it's remarkable the progress that's been made. It's only probably 3 or 4 years ago when the standard answer would be it takes 20 years to make a vaccine. It's now the case that there's a vaccine in the UK that may go into the clinic for first testing in April. I still believe we will be lucky to get a vaccine for mass use in a year from the start of this. That would be extraordinary. But there is progress. There are multiple different types of vaccines, and there are other approaches as well which are being looked at, which may provide protection. So there's a lot going on. As the Prime Minister has said, it's crucial that we support that research to get this into the right place to be able to treat people now, which may be possible with existing drugs, and to promote vaccines.
Sam, thanks for the question. On the 3-month thing for the mortgage holidays, I think that's just one start, and that's just one aspect of the package. Obviously, as the situation evolves, we will review absolutely everything. But I would defer to Patrick in terms of timing for what we believe the right spread of the virus to be. To your broader point about what's the right shape of an economic response package, I want to think about it in a few different ways. One is we've got monetary policy and then we've got fiscal policy. And I think what you saw last week was, in comparison with many jurisdictions around the world, you saw the UK showing global leadership in a coherent, coordinated approach between monetary and fiscal policy, which I think has a multiplier effect beyond the individual measures. And I think that was noticed. So I think in that sense, there's been very significant monetary policy action already. You saw that coordination again today. As I said, we've worked on a very particular financing scheme with the Bank of England, again showing that the two arms of economic policy can work together to provide support. And then you can benchmark what we're doing with other countries around the world. There's a mix of loan schemes are important because ultimately businesses need to have liquidity to get through what is a difficult bridge. But we have unveiled, I think, what would benchmark as a very comprehensive and sizable package of direct fiscal support for business through tax reliefs and cash grants. As I said today, £25,000 for retail, leisure and hospitality businesses up to 51k, £10,000 for several hundred thousand businesses eligible for small business rate relief, and that comes on top of business rates holidays that we've given to several hundred thousand businesses, compensation for statutory sick pay, and also, as I said today, we plan to go further with regard to employment support and supporting people's jobs and incomes, and we want to work with business and the unions to achieve that. And again, that will be very significant direct fiscal action. So I think actually if you look around, we're doing the right things. It needs to be a balance of all measures, but we want to be best in class on all of them.
Yeah, fine, Sam. Of course the buck stops with me, and I take full responsibility for all the actions that this government is taking, all the decisions we're taking, difficult though many of them are, and all the advice we're giving to everybody. And what I'd say to people who are thinking about this advice, the more we follow the advice of our scientific and medical advisors, and the more closely we do what they tell us to do, the better our chances collectively of slowing the disease, of protecting the NHS, and of saving life. And also, of course, the better we can protect our NHS, the less economic damage there will ultimately be. And of course, people care about pubs, and they're right to care about pubs and restaurants. But that is why we're announcing the package, the extraordinary package that Rishi has just unveiled today. That is the way that we should be working to look after our economy. Robert Pesson.
Many businesses are facing collapsing demand, particularly in the leisure industries. They also face demands to pay their taxes from last year's business. They have demands to pay wages. Why is your help in the form of debt and grants that may be repayable when these business owners have got no confidence about what the future may hold? Why not just say now, we will cover your liabilities and we'll assess all of this again at some point when the future is clearer? Because many businesses may simply decide to cease trading rather than take on more debt, which is what you are offering. Equally, you want to incentivize people to do the right thing and go home. So why not announce today how you will make it clear that they will not be penalised for doing the right thing? And then finally to the Prime Minister, is there ever an urgent reason to go to the pub?
Right, I think can I just say, answer just in general terms, right? This is a huge package of support for business, large and small, and it comes in the form of standing behind companies' obligations, behind their debts, on a huge scale, but also in making sure that they have the cash flow that they need. And Rishi has gone through the figures. This is a quite extraordinary effort to put liquidity into the economy at a difficult time. But be in no doubt that one day the UK economy is going to bounce back. And those companies, good, brilliant British companies, will bounce back. And that's why we're taking the steps to protect them that we are today.
Robert, you're right in terms of businesses have fixed costs which we want to target support at to help them get them through this period. If you look at, for most of these businesses, what are their two largest fixed costs? It will largely be rent payments and staff. So on rent, the various cash grants we've announced, which are not repayable, those are direct cash grants, that is direct cash for businesses at scale relative to their rateable value. You can do an approximate rateable value, which is a good approximation for the market rent that someone might be paying on their property. Not perfect, I give you that. But so the grants that we have given actually provide a lot of cover to cover those fixed rental payments that you mentioned. And when it comes to employees, in terms of people not being penalised for doing the right thing, the steps that the Prime Minister already announced and I followed up with in the budget last week made improvements to how SSP works and indeed how ESA works and indeed the types of people that it covers so that no one is penalised for doing the right thing. They can get access to the welfare or benefits or SSP they need from day one. If they're self-isolating, even though they're asymptomatic, that is covered under those provisions as well. But what I did say today as well, the other fixed cost, which is the cost of people, we want to look at. And we want to develop with business and the unions a bold and ambitious employment support package because we want to provide businesses with the security that some of that fixed cost we can help with because that ultimately is good for the individual because it means their income is secure for a period. It's good for the business because it doesn't have to go out of business, and it's good for preserving the job. So as the Prime Minister said, we will get through this, and on the other side, to ensure that what was a temporary shock doesn't become a permanent shock, we want to preserve those jobs. So there are options that are out there to do that, but we will work urgently with unions and business to figure out the best possible solution. But between the cash grants to help on the rateable value and then a package on employment support, I think we will address the two largest fixed costs, the fixed liabilities that you talked about that businesses have.
Thanks. Jason Groves, Daily Mail.
Thank you, Jason Groves from the Daily Mail. Chancellor, there'll be people who are being laid off today and freelancers having their contracts cancelled. Would you ask firms to take a moment and look at this package before taking those sort of decisions? And Prime Minister, you've spoken about needing to possibly make more extreme measures in the coming days and weeks. A lot of people are very confused about schools today. Parents have taken their kids to school this morning. They were told last night by you that they shouldn't mix with their friends, they shouldn't stop for a chat in their street, but their kids can go to school, mix with each other all day and come home. When are you going to close schools?
Jason, I would say that to those businesses. There's many businesses that are quite frankly struggling right now. They haven't done anything wrong, they've seen what's happening and they're seeing their revenues fall off a cliff and they're anxious about what to do. But what I would say is the package of support that we announced last week, the new measures that I've announced today with more to come, hopefully should provide reassurance to all those businesses that support is on its way in various forms. We are going to help them get through this. So they don't need to rush into decisions quickly. They can talk to their banks, they can look at all the support that we've outlined today, see what they're eligible for, and make decisions based on that. And I think working collectively through this together, we will get through to the other side. But that's the reassurance that we want to provide for businesses. We don't want them to have to make those difficult decisions. We want to help them get through this. It's better for them, it's better for the economy, and it's better for people's jobs.
Oh, and on schools, look, I understand completely where people are on schools, and we're keeping that under continuous review. Francis Elliott, Times.
Thank you. Sir Patrick, could you help us a little bit with what inputs to the model changed such that you changed or escalated the approach? Just take us through some of the thinking behind Imperial. Was it that more ICU capacity was needed than you had initially anticipated? Chancellor, the 20 billion figure, is that on top of the 30 billion figure? Is that completely on top of. And perhaps you could just say a little bit more about this employment support. Is this essentially the state meeting wage costs in full or in part?
Sorry, Patrick.
Do you want to go? Yeah.
Yes, so the model is there to try and make sure that we keep NHS capacity, and clearly the aim is to make sure that we save the maximum number of lives and protect the vulnerable. The number of people who may require ventilation, or the proportion of people who might require ventilation, looks a bit higher because the oxygen on its own isn't working all the time, and therefore you have more people who may need to go onto a ventilator. That's one thing that changes the model a little bit. And the second, but the main reason was not so much the change in the model itself, but the place we were in the epidemic, to say we need to get on and accelerate the moves that we wanted to make in terms of the implementation. So it was a mixture of timing, especially, as I said, London was a bit ahead, but also some of the model assumptions as to where you need to get under NHS ventilator and capacity.
Sorry, Francis.
Well, just, Sir Simon Stevens was asked repeatedly today whether he was confident that under the mitigation measures that are currently in place, there were sufficient ventilators and our ICU capacity to cope with that. Are you?
Well, the model, the work we're doing, and by the way, these are models, so you're just going to be very careful about that. These are models. But the measures that have been put in place, which are very big measures, as we're discussing, and they require all of us to do them, and I would like to thank everybody who is already doing them, because we need to do them. These are predicted to have a very major effect on the peak and to suppress it in a big way. They're not trivial interventions. It doesn't mean that it won't be necessary to take more to get it there.
Thanks very much. Heather Stewart, Guardian.
Professor, do you want me to answer Francis?
Oh, sorry, forgive me, sorry.
Yeah,
sorry.
Francis, these are new, they're new measures or extensions of existing measures to the total cost, which we will outline the details and the guidance for shortly as incremental. And to your point on what we're looking at, what we're trying to do is find a way to help businesses meet the fixed costs of their staff without having to let them go, right? So what that will involve is some partnership working between all of us to see how best we can do that. There are models that are out there from other countries that you'll be familiar with. The challenge we have is to make sure to, answer to Laura's question earlier, is whatever we do, we need to make sure that it can work fast and quickly. And what we can't do is try and reinvent something or invent something from scratch that takes too long to get up the ground. So we'll need to work with the grain of what we've got, but we want to be ambitious in that regard because we want to provide security to people. We want to provide security to businesses that they don't have to make these difficult decisions. We can all get through this together.
Thank you. Yes, sorry, Heather.
Heather Stewart from The Guardian. To the Chancellor, £330 billion is a very big number. Are you confident that you have the capacity, the bank does, the Treasury does, to make sure that businesses know about this scheme and to get the money out the door on a timescale that people will need it if their businesses are to remain open? Can I also ask about food? So shoppers are arriving in supermarkets today to find shelves empty. You've tried exhorting the public to shop sensibly, and you've repeatedly said that you're talking to supermarkets about this to keep supply chains working. But what practical steps are you going to take to make sure we've all got the food we need to eat throughout these coming weeks and months?
Heather, yes, we're confident we have the capacity. We've been working round the clock to make sure that we can deliver this as quickly as possible. And as I said, it should be up and running by the end of this week, start of next week. We will supplement that with an extensive retail campaign to make sure that all businesses are aware of what is available so that they can walk into their local bank branch next week and talk to somebody about the coronavirus business interruption loan that the government is guaranteeing and backing. That's our ambition. We want that. That's what we want to have happen.
And on the supermarkets, we're absolutely confident that our supply chains are working and will work, and that we will get farm to fork food supplies for this country, and therefore people should have no reason to stockpile or panic buy. Nicola Bartlett from the Daily Mirror.
Thank you. Prime Minister, the British public really want to do the right thing, but there's been a lot of confusion about what the message is. As far as people understand it, that they should be staying at home as much as possible. Can you spell out absolutely what the message is? But also, some of the measures that you've outlined today are designed to help people if they lose their jobs. statutory sick pay in this country is much lower than in a lot of other European countries. Are you confident that there is enough support available for families who are worried about what seems to be a prolonged period, longer than potentially or initially envisaged? And finally, Prime Minister, you made a joke about a last gasp attempt to get ventilators. Is that appropriate language to be using in this kind of situation? Thank you.
Well, first of all, on the advice that we're giving, let's be absolutely clear that what we want to do is stop the transmission of disease. And so what we're saying to the public is avoid all unnecessary contact that could involve the transmission of disease. That means not going to places where you might pick it up, pubs, restaurants, and so forth, avoiding gatherings large and small. And I think people do understand that. We are seeing an effect of the advice that we've given. You also know about what we're saying with home isolation, staying at home if you have any of the two key symptoms, a high temperature or a continuous new cough. Everybody understands that. I hope 7 days if you have one of the two symptoms. 14 days if someone in your household has one of those two key symptoms. And as I say, we'll be bringing forward further measures to look after particularly vulnerable groups, to shield them even more. And on your second point, I think what I want, what all business want to explain what I was saying, is an end to suffering. And that is why they are working incredibly hard in the next few weeks, and we really only have a few weeks to build literally thousands of ventilators that this country will need. And it's an amazing, the British industry, manufacturers, are responding to this challenge with incredible energy and determination. George Parker, FT.
Chancellor, you set out a wide-ranging series of measures to mitigate the effects of the virus on business. You'll have seen the US administration is talking about sending a cheque of $1,000 to every individual. Is there a case for a broader fiscal stimulus, maybe coordinated on a global basis? And to the Prime Minister, we're hearing earlier on about insurance companies and their obligations. Are you speaking to the insurance companies, and do you think they're doing enough to help their customers through this difficult period?
George, with regard to fiscal stimulus, what it says, obviously we had a budget last week that unveiled a fiscal stimulus of about 1% of GDP, which, the time was significant. That said...
Not to be forgotten.
That said, of course, we look at these things and we'll respond as the economy demands. In terms of coordination, both the Prime Minister and I are in regular contact with our counterparts across the G7 and the G20. You would have seen various communiques that have gone out to make sure that we can be as coordinated as we can on a range of different measures. In terms of the right way to do that, there's different ways to do it. In terms of checks to people, as I said, I think working to see what we can do on the employment support side is probably my first preference. But if the need arises for further demand stimulus in general that we think would be effective, we can obviously look at that. But as I talked about at the budget speech, given the particular situation we're dealing with, typical demand side actions might not have the same benefit or salience that they would normally have. But we, of course, stand ready to do whatever it takes.
And sorry, on the insurance point, George. I think Rishi has been talking directly to the insurers. But what we've done is to ensure that where people have policies that they say that the insurers might have said only involve a payout, where as it were, the insured party has been compelled to shut their business, whereas we've only urged people to stay away, and there's been some sort of quibble about whether or not to pay out. The insurers have stepped up to the plate and understood that they have to pay out to those businesses. But Rishi, do you want to?
That's that, and we've reached that agreement with them today.
Thanks, Paul Wall.
Paul Ward from HuffPost. Chancellor, first can I ask you, the Prime Minister last week said he wanted to level with people, that things would be bad in terms of deaths. Do you want to level with people today and say how bad things are going to be in the economy over the next 18 months? A lot of people are saying a recession is inevitable. Do you think one is inevitable, but that you're going to try and mitigate that as much as possible? And to you, Prime Minister, if you do close schools, what steps are you going to take to help children who run free school meals to stop them going hungry?
Paul, I'd repeat what I said last week, which is even more clear today as a result of the actions that we're taking and how things have progressed. This will have a significant impact on our economy. That's what I said last week. I stand by that. But I also stand by what else I said is, this will be temporary. Right? We will get through this, and we will get through it together. And the steps that we're taking mean that we will emerge together on the other side, able to rebound back to confidence and economic activity. And that's why all the interventions that we're looking at are designed to provide that bridge through this, what will be a very difficult and challenging period, but get us through this period, and so that we can be there on the other side to emerge stronger thereafter. But yes, it will be significant, but that's why we're doing everything we're doing. We're doing whatever it takes to get through it, and things will be better in time.
Thanks. Paul, on free school meals, and as we come to the decision on schools, we will have obviously plans ready to go on that. Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, has a plan to make sure that parents with kids who are eligible for free school meals get the compensation or the treatment they need one way or the other. We certainly anticipated that. I think probably we should wrap it up now, because these are daily conversations, daily press conferences now, and I think Rishi has outlined a pretty big and important plan that I hope everybody has been able to understand and has been able to interrogate us about. Look, what we're doing is we're asking the public to do some pretty big things in the changes we're asking us all to make in our lives. And I understand the effect that is going to have on the economy. I just want to repeat that key message. The more sedulously, the more zealously, the more meticulously, the more scrupulously we can follow the scientific advice that we've been given, the better we will be able to protect our NHS, the more lives we will be able to save, and the quicker we will get through this experience, and the more strongly our economy will bounce back. But in the meantime, as you'll have gathered this afternoon, we are going to do whatever it takes. Thank you all very much.
OK, so there we are. That's the second of the press conferences. Boris Johnson, well, using the language of war, really. He says we're going to act like a wartime government and do whatever we can to support the economy. We're going to help millions of businesses, tens of millions of families. This enemy can be deadly, but it is also beatable, he said. However tough the months ahead, we have the resolve to win the fight. And on the detail, the Chancellor, well, it was 30 billion last week. It's now 330 billion, a package of loans, really, loan guarantees, which he has introduced. He says it's an unprecedented package. And he said we will do what it takes. Ian King is our business presenter, was hearing all that. I mean, Ian, this is big stuff, isn't it? They're throwing unlimited cash at it. The Chancellor, I think, said 3 or 4 times, we'll do whatever it takes.
Yes, he did indeed, Mark. And those words are, I think, very specifically aimed at the financial markets. You recall Rishi Sunak, of course, worked as a hedge fund manager for a while and at Goldman Sachs. And those words, we will do whatever it takes, were exactly the same words that Mario Draghi, the former president of the European Central Bank, used in 2012 at the height of the Eurozone sovereign debt crisis, where it really felt like the Eurozone economy was going off a cliff. And Mario Draghi, who was quite new to the job, and he stood up and said, we will do whatever it takes and you will see it will be enough. And of course, it did indeed save the Eurozone from catastrophe. I think that choice of words from Rishi Sunak, very, very significant indeed. Now, on those specific measures, Marcus, you say some £330 billion worth of loan guarantees, 15% of UK GDP. That is comparable with the kind of packages that we've seen elsewhere. You might remember we were talking before the Prime Minister began speaking and the Chancellor about the package, for example, that Emmanuel Macron has put forward during the last 24 hours, some 300 billion euros worth of support for French businesses. So it is comparable with that. There are a couple of interesting little details which we didn't get. Obviously, when Rishi Sunak was talking about loan guarantees, he didn't mention the rates of interest that would be made available to corporates. He did with the smaller companies. He said they could borrow up to £5 million, which is an increase from the 1.2 million that was announced last week. He didn't actually say what rate of interest they'd be charged. He merely said on attractive terms. Those was his language. And it was very significant also, Mark, I thought, that during the press conference, Boris Johnson, when he was asked, well, what makes you think businesses will actually want to hock themselves up and borrow more? It might be easier for them to pull down the shutters. And he didn't really have an answer, the Prime Minister, to that. Now, the other thing to watch out for, I think, which is going to be really significant, Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, referring to an employment support package to be thrashed out with the unions and with business groups such as the CBI and Make UK, the Institute of Directors and the British Chambers of Commerce and the Federation of Small Businesses. And what I think that will be looking at is in terms of how you enable small businesses to carry on paying the checks when they may be pulling down the shutters and not being able to trade. Not much information on that. I suspect we'll get that over coming days, but considerably that could jack up the price of this package overall. Likewise, Mark, we didn't get a figure on the extension to the business rates holiday. Now, obviously, last week, the Chancellor said that any business with a rateable value of £51,000 or less would get a year's holiday from business rates. Today, he extended that to all businesses in the retail and hospitality sector. Now, I think off the top of my head, business rates is something like £32 billion that it raises for the Treasury. A lot of that comes from the retail sector. So I think potentially there, you are talking billions and billions of pounds more on top of the other things that the Chancellor's committed there today.
OK, Ian, thanks very much indeed. Let's go to Laura Bundock in the Sky newsroom. Good evening, Laura. I mean, let's just catch up on where we are with this outbreak. So more cases, more deaths, and the scientific advisor, chief scientific advisor, saying fewer than 20,000 deaths in all would be a good outcome for the country.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we know now that we've had an increase. The number of deaths, rather, in the UK has gone up to 71. The majority of those in England, and the majority of the English cases in London. And you're right, we heard this big shift in strategy yesterday. We know that the reason for the shift in strategy is to try and suppress the peak, to give the NHS basically more time, more room to cope with the increase in patients. And that was based on the fact that if they didn't do this, they were expecting a potential death toll of 250,000. So now we have the chief scientific advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, telling MPs today that he believes this number can be radically reduced by these extra measures, by these new steps that were outlined yesterday. And he's hoping that it could be under 20,000 people now potentially at risk of dying from the virus. Of course, these are all models, these are all predictions, but that is a significant drop from the figures that they were looking at previously. That is what caused this shift, this change, a significant move in terms of what they were planning to do about it. I think that is very much the optimistic hope now that they can bring down the figures. We've also been hearing about the extra measures that may need to be brought in if they're to carry on bringing down and suppressing the peak of the virus. And lots of questions now being asked about the potential closure of schools. Boris Johnson there saying that it was still very much under review, no dates given. We know lots of questions have now been asked. It's not government position, although we are now hearing that schools are closing, both independent schools and some state schools as well.
OK, Laura, thank you very much. And Kate McCann is in Downing Street and has been listening to the news conference. And Kate, I was struck by how Boris Johnson was very much using this language of war.
That's right. I think there's been a change in tone from the Prime Minister, and perhaps what Ian King was saying there about Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor's repetition of "we will do all it takes," is about communicating with the public as much as it is about communicating with the markets. But for the Prime Minister, there was certainly an element of language of war there, wasn't there? He was talking about this is an enemy. The Chancellor was talking about this is the biggest economic fight that we've ever had on our hands. There is a sense now from Downing Street that they want people to hear them taking this very seriously. They want to communicate properly what is happening and when. You heard the Prime Minister setting out again who should take these measures seriously, what they ought to be doing and why. There's also a nod there from Boris Johnson to the suggestion that schools may well be closed. He was saying that the Education Secretary has a plan in place for those on free school meals, a suggestion that there could be wider measures, and from Sir Patrick Vallance that they could come more quickly than was previously expected. The communication around this now for the Prime Minister is very important. That's why we're seeing these daily press conferences, and why too he wants to be very clear that people need to listen to the advice. They need to take it very seriously, because if they don't, there will be a need for more measures to suppress the curve of this virus in order to ensure the NHS has the capacity to deal with it.
OK, Kate, thank you very much. And just to recap, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak announcing a package, an unprecedented package, he called it, of £330 billion of loans and loan guarantees to businesses, and a rates holiday for businesses, and also cash grants. This is the News Hour on Sky News.